The stars had never belonged to humanity. At least, that was what they had taught them for 300 years. Jake stood at the window of his cargo ship and watched the purple glow of Seven fade behind him. The mining colony had been his home for 34 years. His father had died there, crushed under 1,000 tons of rock in a tunnel collapse that the inspectors called an acceptable loss. Jake had been 16 years old. He remembered standing at the edge of the mass grave they dug for the 47 miners who died that day. No names on the marker, just a number. They did not care about human names. 300 years ago, humanity had looked up at the stars with hope. They sent their first ships beyond the solar system with dreams of discovery and wonder. What they found instead was the Dominion, a coalition of 12 ancient species who had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. They looked at humanity and saw something useful. Not partners, not equals, workers, tools with hands and feet that could dig their mines, fight their wars, and die in their place. Earth's leaders had no choice but to accept. The fleet could have burned every city on the planet in a single afternoon. So humanity bowed its head and learned to serve. They spread across the stars, but always as servants. They built colonies on 100 worlds, but never owned them. They raised children who grew up knowing that their lives belonged to someone else. Had spent her entire career trying to change this. She was 52 years old now, and her hair had turned gray from decades of fighting battles she could never win. As Earth's senior diplomat to the Galactic Council, she had written thousands of petitions. She had given hundreds of speeches. She had begged, argued, and pleaded for humanity to be given a seat at the table where decisions were made. Every time the answer was the same. Humanity was too young, too primitive, too emotional. Perhaps in another 1,000 years if they proved themselves worthy. Had learned to swallow her anger and keep working. She told herself that progress took time. She told herself that her might see a better galaxy, even if she never would. She held onto hope like a candle in endless darkness. Then they announced the Population Realignment Act, and the candle went out. The news came on a cold morning in January. Was in her office on the diplomatic station orbiting Earth when the message arrived. She read it 3 times, certain she had misunderstood, but the words did not change. Effective immediately, all human colonies were required to surrender 40% of their children between the ages of 6 and 12. These children would be transported to educational centers for cultural integration. The Council had determined that humanity's continued resistance to proper galactic values was a result of inadequate upbringing. The children would be taught to think correctly. They would be returned to their families once the process was complete. Everyone knew what cultural integration meant. The children would be raised to serve. They would be taught to forget their parents, their homes, their humanity. They would come back as strangers if they came back at all. Stood before the Galactic Council 3 days later. The Great Chamber was filled with representatives from the 12 elder species. They sat in elevated seats that looked down upon the small platform where humans were permitted to speak. Had stood on this platform many times. She had always felt small here. Today, she felt something different. She felt empty. She made her case with all the skill she had developed over 30 years. She spoke of human rights, of family bonds, of the trauma that would be inflicted on millions of children. She cited treaties and precedents. She appealed to mercy and reason. The High Speaker listened with the patient expression of someone watching a small animal perform a trick. When finished, he leaned forward in his seat. His gray skin caught the light, and his 4 eyes studied her like she was an interesting insect. "Ambassador," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber, "your species exists because we permit it. Your colonies exist because we allow them. Your children exist because we have not yet decided otherwise." A ripple of amusement passed through the assembled representatives. Several of them made sounds that recognized as laughter. "The Council's decision is final," the High Speaker continued. "You may return to your people and inform them that collection will begin in 60 days. I suggest you use that time to help them understand their place in our galaxy. Stood frozen on the platform. For 30 years, she had believed that patience and diplomacy could build a bridge between humanity and the elder species. For 30 years, she had told herself that progress was possible if humans just kept trying, kept proving themselves, kept waiting. She looked up at the high speaker's face and saw nothing there. No hatred, no cruelty, just the calm certainty of someone who had never once considered that humans might matter. I understand, said quietly. She turned and walked out of the chamber. Her footsteps echoed in the silence. None of the representatives spoke. None of them cared enough to say anything else. On the transport back to Earth, sat alone in her cabin and stared at the wall. She thought about her daughter and her two. She thought about the millions of families across human space who would soon receive soldiers at their doors. She thought about the 3 centuries of service and suffering that had led to this moment. Something fundamental shifted inside her. It was not anger, though anger was part of it. It was not despair, though despair had brought her here. It was something colder and harder. It was the feeling of a door closing forever and a new door opening in its place. Opened her communication terminal and began to write. Not a petition, not a plea, not a diplomatic proposal. She wrote a speech, and every word burned with a fire she had kept buried for her entire life. Far away, on a dozen worlds and 100 space stations, other humans felt the same fire kindle in their hearts. They did not know each other. They had never met, but they all understood the same truth at the same moment. 300 years of patience had earned them nothing. 300 years of hope had changed nothing. They would never see them as equals. They would never stop taking. And so, in the quiet spaces of their hearts, humanity began to prepare, not for survival anymore, for something else entirely. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. The news spread through human space like blood through water. Within hours, every colony knew about the Population Realignment Act. Within days, the protests began. On Mars, workers walked out of the terraforming plants and gathered in the domed cities to shout their anger at the sky. On 7, miners refused to enter the tunnels. On Earth, millions filled the streets of every major city, holding pictures of their children and demanding answers that no one could give. They watched all of this with mild interest. They had seen rebellions before. Younger species often struggled to accept their role in the galactic order. The solution was always the same: show them strength and they would remember their place. Peacekeeping forces were dispatched to restore order. The soldiers wore black armor and carried weapons that could level buildings. They did not use gentle methods. On the colony world of New Montana, the first collection teams arrived 3 weeks early. The commander wanted to set an example. He chose a small farming settlement called Clearwater, population 800. There was a school there with 112 children. Ben had lived in Clearwater his whole life. He was 61 years old. He had spent 40 years growing crops in alien soil, raising a family, and trying to build something that would last. His own children were grown now. His attended the little school on the hill. When the transport ships appeared in the morning sky, Ben was working in his fields. He watched them land at the edge of town. He watched the soldiers march down the main street in their black armor. He understood immediately why they had come. Ben walked home and took his hunting rifle from the cabinet where it had sat unused for 15 years. It was an old weapon, designed for shooting wild animals, not soldiers in advanced armor. It would do nothing against the... Ben knew this. He picked it up anyway. He reached the school before the soldiers did. Parents had already gathered at the entrance, some crying, some screaming, all of them helpless. The teachers had locked the doors, but everyone knew that would not stop what was coming. Ben walked through the crowd without speaking. He climbed the steps to the school entrance and turned to face the street. The soldiers were 50 meters away, marching in perfect formation. "Ben, what are you doing?" someone called out. He did not answer. He stood in front of the door with his old rifle in his hands and waited. The commander stopped his troops and studied the old man blocking the entrance. His translator turned Ben's silence into something his alien mind could understand, a gesture of defiance, meaningless but inconvenient. "Move aside, human," the commander said through his helmet speaker. "The children will be collected. This is not negotiable." Ben raised his rifle. His hands were steady. His heart was calm. "No," he said. The commander made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You understand this changes nothing. You will die, and we will take the children anyway." "I know," Ben said, "but I am going to stand here anyway." He did not fire. He simply stood there, one old man against an army, knowing he could not win and refusing to step aside. The moment stretched. The soldiers waited for their orders. The parents watched in frozen silence. Then something unexpected happened. A woman named Grace Perry walked out of the crowd and stood beside Ben. She was a teacher at the school. She had no weapon. She had nothing but her own body and her refusal to move. Another person joined them, then another. Within minutes, 40 people stood on the steps of that small school, forming a wall between the soldiers and the children inside. None of them had weapons that mattered. None of them had any hope of victory. They stood anyway. The commander could have killed them all in seconds. He hesitated, not from mercy but from confusion. His training had not prepared him for this. Rebellions were supposed to involve weapons and tactics and strategy. This was something else. This was something his species had never faced. He gave the order to fire. Ben died on those steps, along with 18 others. The soldiers broke down the doors and took the children. The collection was completed on schedule. But someone had been recording everything. Within hours, the footage reached every human settlement in the galaxy. People watched Ben stand in that doorway with his useless rifle and his steady hands. They watched him die for children who were not his own. They watched the others join him, one by one, choosing death over surrender. Something changed in human hearts that day. Something that had been sleeping for 300 years finally woke up. Admiral Danny received his orders from Earth's puppet government the next morning. He was commanded to position his defensive fleet to assist collection teams. He was told to ensure that no human vessels interfered with the transportation of children to centers. Danny read the orders twice. He was 58 years old. He had served in Earth's fleet for 35 years, always following the rules, always obeying the treaties that kept humanity alive. He had trained his crews in secret, teaching them tactics and skills that were officially forbidden. He had told himself it was just in case, just for emergencies, just for a day that would probably never come. He looked at the footage from New Montana again. He watched Ben refuse to move. Then Danny deleted his orders and began sending encrypted messages to commanders he trusted. The messages used old Earth codes that they had never bothered to learn. They contained only 6 words. "The day has come. Prepare everything." Across human space, people who had waited their entire lives began to move. Engineers opened hidden shipyards in asteroid belts. Scientists activated laboratories that had been built in secret decades ago. Soldiers slipped away from their posts and gathered in places they did not know existed. Jake received a message from an old friend he had not spoken to in years. The message asked if he wanted to do something that mattered. Jake thought about his father dying in the mine. He thought about the children in the cargo holds of ships. He thought about Ben standing in that doorway. He sent back one word, yes. They continued their collections. They crushed protests with efficient brutality. They filed reports noting that human resistance was within expected parameters. Their intelligence officers saw no evidence of organized rebellion. They had no idea that the storm was already gathering. They had no idea that humanity had finally decided to stop waiting and start fighting. They looked at the humans around them and saw the same servants they had always seen. They could not see the fire burning behind those quiet eyes. On the morning of October 14th, every screen in human space went dark for exactly 3 seconds. Then they all lit up with the same image. Stood behind a simple wooden podium. The flag of Earth hung on the wall behind her. She wore no formal diplomatic clothes, no symbols of office. She looked like what she was, a tired woman who had spent her whole life fighting for something that seemed impossible. Billions of humans stopped what they were doing and watched. Workers in mines, families in their homes, soldiers in their barracks, prisoners in detention centers. All of them saw the same face at the same moment. Looked directly into the camera. When she spoke, her voice was calm and steady. 300 years ago you found us, she began. We were just learning to walk among the stars. We had so many dreams. We believed that the universe was full of wonders waiting to be discovered. We believed that other species would welcome us as friends. She paused. Instead, we met you, the Dominion, the rulers of the galaxy. You looked at us and saw something useful, not partners, not equals, workers, soldiers, servants. You told us we were lucky to be allowed to exist. And we believed you. For 300 years we believed you. We worked in your mines. We died in your wars. We built your stations and your ships and your cities. We watched our children grow up knowing they would never be free. And we told ourselves it was necessary. We told ourselves it could have been worse. We told ourselves that someday, if we proved ourselves worthy, you would accept us. His voice grew harder. We asked for equality, you us. We asked for justice. You ignored us. We asked for mercy. You laughed at us. We asked you not to take our children and you told us to remember our place. We remember. We remember every miner who died in your tunnels while you called it acceptable losses. We remember every soldier who bled on your battlefields while you watched from safe distances. We remember every family torn apart because you decided we existed only to serve you. We remember Ben standing in that doorway with an old rifle and refusing to move. We remember the 18 people who stood beside him. We remember how you killed them and took the children anyway. And now you want to take all of our children. You want to teach them to forget who they are. You want to turn them into servants like us, grateful for chains and thankful for cages. Leaned forward slightly. No. The word hung in the air like the sound of a door slamming shut. Today, humanity says no. Today, we say enough. Today, we stop asking for permission to be free. Today, we stop hoping that you will give us what you have proven you will never give. You told us we exist because you allow it. You told us our place is beneath you. You told us that our lives belong to you. We have a different answer. As spoke, the camera view expanded to show more than just her face. Behind her, through a massive window, something was appearing in space. Ships, hundreds of ships, then thousands. For 50 years we have been preparing, continued. While you watched us labor and called us primitive, we were building. In asteroid belts you never surveyed. In abandoned moons you never visited. In the dark spaces between your perfect systems. We built a fleet. The ships kept coming. Battle cruisers and destroyers and fighters. Cargo ships converted into carriers. Mining vessels armed with weapons that had been hidden for decades. A tide of metal and light rising from the darkness. You thought we had no scientists. We had scientists. You thought we had no engineers. We had engineers. You thought we could not build weapons that could hurt you. You were wrong. Every human worker in your empire is part of a single network. Every miner, every soldier, every servant. We have been waiting. We have been watching. We have been counting down to this moment. His voice rose. You asked us once what we wanted. We told you, equality, dignity, a seat at the table. You refused. So now we come to take what you would not give. Not to be your equals, to be free of you forever. To the Dominion and all the elder species who supported them, you have 60 hours to withdraw all forces from human space. You have 60 hours to release every human child taken under the Realignment Act. You have 60 hours to decide whether you want to face what comes next. This is not a negotiation. This is not a request. This is a statement of fact. Humanity is no longer asking for anything. Step back from the podium. Her final words were quiet, but they echoed across a billion screens. We will not be collected. The transmission ended. The screens went dark again. And then the galaxy learned what humanity had been building. Admiral Danny stood on the bridge of the battleship Defiance and watched his fleet form up around him. 3,000 warships, another 10,000 armed civilian vessels, crews that had trained in secret for years, waiting for this moment. His communications officer reported that command was sending urgent messages demanding explanations. Danny did not respond. There was nothing left to explain. Jake sat in the cockpit of his old cargo hauler, now loaded with missiles instead of ore. Around him flew a squadron of similar ships, miners and haulers who had answered the call. None of them were professional soldiers. All of them had chosen to be here. Across human space, the hidden forces revealed themselves. Shipyards opened in asteroid fields. Weapons platforms powered up in orbit around forgotten moons. Defense networks activated on colony worlds that had seemed helpless. They finally understood that they had made a terrible mistake. For 300 years, they had looked at humanity and seen only what they expected to see: primitive creatures, useful laborers, acceptable losses. They had never looked deeper. They had never imagined that servants could dream of freedom. They had never considered that patience could be a weapon, silence could be a strategy, and suffering could become strength. The galaxy was about to learn what humans were truly capable of. The war had begun. They responded to humanity's declaration with overwhelming force. They had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. They had crushed rebellions from species far older and more powerful than humans. They expected this war to last a few weeks at most. The first battle fleet arrived at the system within 3 days. 200 warships, each one larger than anything humans had ever built. Their commander sent a message ahead: surrender now, and the punishment will be merciful. Continue fighting, and entire colonies will be reduced to ash. Jake was waiting for them. His squadron was not a military unit. It was 43 ships crewed by miners, haulers, and mechanics who had spent their lives moving cargo through the asteroid fields of 7. They knew nothing about proper military tactics, but they knew these asteroids better than anyone alive. The fleet entered the system in perfect formation. Their sensors detected the small human force hiding among the rocks and ice. The commander almost laughed. This was what the rebellion had sent to stop him: a handful of cargo ships against 200 destroyers. He ordered his fleet forward, expecting the humans to flee or surrender. Instead, Jake's voice came over the open channel. "You are about to learn something important," Jake said. "We built these mines with our hands. We know where everything is buried." The first explosion started before the commander could respond. Mining charges, placed decades ago and hidden among the asteroids, detonated in precise sequence. The blasts threw mountains of rock into the formation. Ships collided with debris. Shields overloaded from impacts they had not expected. Jake's squadron moved through the chaos like fish through water. They knew every tunnel, every gap, every safe path through the field. The ships were blind, their sensors overwhelmed by dust and debris and electromagnetic noise from the explosions. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, 112 ships had been destroyed or disabled. Jake lost 19 of his 43 ships, but the remaining forces retreated. For the first time in recorded history, a human force had won a major engagement against the Dominion. The news spread through both human and space. Other commanders began to understand that this war would not be easy. The High Council responded by sending their grand fleet to Earth itself. If they could crush humanity's, the rebellion would collapse. 20,000 ships gathered above the birthplace of mankind, blocking out the stars with their numbers. Admiral Danny watched them come. His fleet was outnumbered 7-1. Traditional tactics would mean certain defeat, but Danny had not planned for traditional tactics. Earth was not the defenseless world they expected. Every satellite in orbit had been quietly modified over the past decades. Communication arrays that also contained weapons. Space stations that concealed missile batteries. Even the debris from old launches had been collected and converted into kinetic projectiles. The planet itself was a fortress. Its people had spent 50 years preparing for this moment. Every city had underground shelters. Every government had evacuation plans. Every citizen knew their role. Danny broadcast a single message to the fleet. You spent 3 centuries teaching us how to die. You never considered what we would do when we decided to live. The battle for Earth lasted 2 weeks. They threw everything they had at the planet. Human defenders fought with a fury that their enemies could not understand. Ships that should have retreated stayed and fought until they were destroyed. Pilots flew into enemy formations knowing they would not return. Ground forces held positions against impossible odds. The cost was terrible. Millions died. Cities burned. Ships broke apart in the silence of space. But humanity did not break. Every time they thought they had won, humans found another way to fight. And then the uprisings began. Across space, humans who had served as laborers and soldiers and servants for generations rose up simultaneously. They had been waiting for a signal. They had been preparing in secret. Now they moved. On the shipyards of Prime, human workers sabotaged the production lines they had built. Ships under construction were destroyed before they could be completed. The yards that produced 1/3 of the Dominion's fleet went dark in a single night. On communication relay stations throughout the Empire, human technicians disabled the networks they maintained. Fleets lost contact with their commanders. Orders took days to arrive instead of seconds. On space stations where officers slept in comfort, human servants opened airlocks and cut power to life support systems. The message was simple: you treated us as nothing. Now you will learn what nothing feels like. They found themselves fighting on 1,000 fronts simultaneously. Their infrastructure, built on human labor, collapsed around them. Their supply lines, maintained by human workers, failed without warning. Their intelligence networks, which had never bothered to monitor servant populations, were completely blind. After 6 months of fighting, the High Speaker sent a message offering a ceasefire. He proposed returning to the old arrangement. Humans could keep their children if they returned to their proper role. Certain reforms might even be considered. There was still time to end this madness. Received the message on a transport ship traveling between battle fronts. She was not the same woman who had stood before the council and begged for mercy. Her hair had turned completely white. Her face showed the weight of every death this war had cost. She recorded her response. There is no arrangement, there is no negotiation, there is no going back, there is only what comes next. The war continued. Months became years. They threw everything they had at humanity, and humanity endured. They had spent 300 years learning how to survive suffering. Now they turned that knowledge into a weapon. One by one, the other elder species from the conflict. They looked at humanity and saw something they had never expected. A species that would not stop fighting. A species that would sacrifice everything for freedom. A species that had nothing left to lose and nothing they were afraid to lose. They found themselves alone. And humanity kept coming. The war lasted 3 years. It cost humanity dearly. Billions of lives were lost. Dozens of colonies were reduced to ash. Ships crewed by fathers and mothers and children vanished into the darkness between stars. The price of freedom was paid in blood and tears and sacrifice beyond measure. But humanity did not break. They had spent 300 years learning how to endure. Now they proved that endurance could become strength. By the third year, the Dominion was crumbling. The other elder species had abandoned them. Their fleet was reduced to half its original size. Their economy, built on human labor, had collapsed. Their empire was falling apart from within as other servant races saw what humans had accomplished and began to dream their own dreams of freedom. The final battle took place above Prime, the of the species that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. Admiral Danny led the assault. His fleet was battered and exhausted. Many of his ships were held together by desperate repairs and stubborn will. They had crossed the galaxy fighting impossible odds to reach this moment. Jake flew in that final battle. His old cargo hauler had been repaired and rebuilt so many times that almost nothing remained of the original ship. He had lost friends, lost comrades, lost parts of himself that would never come back. But he was still flying. The defenders fought with the desperation of those who know they have already lost. They threw everything at the human fleet. For 3 days, the battle raged above their world. Ships burned and died in numbers that would have been unimaginable before this war began. On the 4th day, the High Speaker broadcast a request for a meeting to discuss terms of surrender. Traveled to Prime to receive it. She was 55 years old now. The war had aged her beyond her years. She walked with a slowness that came from carrying too much weight for too long. The council chamber had not changed. The same elevated seats looked down on the same small platform where humans were permitted to speak. The same representatives sat in judgment above her, but everything was different now. The contempt in their eyes had been replaced by something else: fear. The High Speaker spoke first. His voice was carefully controlled, but could hear the strain beneath it. Ambassador, you have proven your point. Humanity is stronger than we believed. We are prepared to offer generous terms, full equality within the Dominion, seats on the Council, autonomy for your colonies, everything you asked for before the war. Stood silent for a long moment. She remembered the last time she had been in this room. She remembered how they had laughed at her. She remembered being told to know her place. 3 years ago, she said quietly, I stood here and asked you for mercy. I asked you not to take our children. You told me that humanity exists because you permit it. She looked up at the High Speaker. We are not here to negotiate equality. We are not here to ask for seats at your table. We are here to inform you that the Dominion is over. A murmur of shock passed through the chamber. The High Speaker leaned forward. You cannot do this. The galaxy will not accept. The galaxy is watching, interrupted. Her voice was still quiet, but it filled the chamber like thunder. They have seen what happens when you push humanity too far. Every species you have treated as servants, every civilization you have looked down upon, every world you have claimed as your property, they are all watching. She took a step forward. Your empire is dissolved. Your species will be treated fairly, more fairly than you ever treated us. You will not be enslaved. You will not be hunted. You will not be reduced to acceptable losses, because we are not like you. But you will never rule over others again. You will never decide who is worthy and who is not. You will never take another child from another family. The High Speaker's 4 eyes were wide with disbelief. You cannot simply erase 10,000 years of. We just did, said. She turned and walked out of the chamber. No one tried to stop her. 50 years later, the galaxy was a different place. The coalition of free species had replaced the Dominion. Humanity sat on its governing council, not as a minor voice, but as a founding member. Former servant races from across the stars had joined them. A new era had begun. Jake was 87 years old. He had retired from flying long ago, but he still looked up at the stars every night. He could name the systems where he had fought, the places where his friends had died, the battles that had seemed impossible until they were won. On the 50th anniversary of the Declaration, He gave a speech to a crowd of humans and aliens gathered on Earth, the same planet where had first said the words that changed everything. "They asked me once why we fought so hard," Jake said. His voice was rough with age, but it carried across the assembly. "Why we risked everything when we could have simply endured the way we had for 300 years. He looked out at the faces before him, human faces, alien faces, children who had never known what it was like to be called a servant. Because there comes a moment when endurance becomes surrender, when patience becomes acceptance, when silence becomes betrayal of everyone who will come after you. They pushed us until we had nothing left to lose, and then they discovered something that every species in this galaxy now understands." Jake smiled, old eyes bright with memory and tears. "When humanity finally says enough, the universe listens." He stepped back from the podium. The crowd was silent for a moment. Then the applause began, not just from humans, but from 100 different species standing together under the same stars. Somewhere far away, the children of those who had fought and died were growing up free. They would never know what it was like to be told their lives belonged to someone else. They would never stand at mass graves with no names on the markers. They would never have to choose between submission and oblivion. That was the gift their parents had given them, a galaxy where they could be anything they wanted to be. That was the legacy of the day humanity finally said enough. And no civilization in the galaxy would ever forget it.